Hey, it's Lynn, and today I'm coming at you with something a little bit different this time. I have a movie review for The Materialists, Celine Song's 2025 follow up to Past Lives, and a film that I've been sitting with longer than I expected before feeling ready to speak about it. And I know that I am incredibly late to this conversation, and I want to be honest why. This movie unsettled me in ways I needed to understand before I could say anything true. And what I felt watching it wasn't necessarily disappointment. It was something closer to the ache of watching a film approach something extraordinary and then very quietly step back from it. And that took a while to name, but here we are in 2026. Nonetheless, better late than never. And so the film follows Lucy, played by Dakota Johnson, a former actress turned matchmaker at a boutique New York firm called Adore, where love is treated more or less openly as a financial instrument. Lucy has brokered 9 marriages, and she attends those weddings and then goes home alone after. Her personal philosophy is stated without apology. She will either die alone or marry someone wealthy. She is not unaware of the contradiction this creates with her professional life. She holds both things at once, and the film is at its most alive when it takes that tension seriously. The story finds its shape at one of her clients' weddings, where two men enter and re enter her orbit simultaneously. Harry, played by Pedro Pascal, is a private equity finance bro, accomplished, emotionally curious, and everything Lucy's professional criteria would endorse. John, played by Chris Evans, is her ex boyfriend working the wedding as a caterer, still pursuing an acting career, and still living somewhere without reliable hot water. The relationship ended over the slow accumulation of financial resentment, among many other things, and the ordinary erosion of two people wanting different things and pretending for as long as they could that love was enough to cover the gap. What follows is less a love triangle in the conventional sense than a meditation on what we actually want when we say we want a partner, and how honestly we're willing to examine ourselves in the answering. Shot on 35 millimeters by cinematographer Shabier Kirchmer, the film is at every moment genuinely beautiful, warm, grainy, and alive in a way that feels almost like a counterargument to its own cool transactional world. Song drew from her own time working as a matchmaker in New York, and that intimacy is everywhere in the texture of the film. The clinical shorthand of client assessments, the way attraction gets reduced to a column of data, all of it. And now let's talk about what the film does with all of that. There is genuine intelligence in the way the materialists renders modern dating, not the app swiping variety specifically, though the sensibility does translate, but essentially the broader experience of trying to find a person in a world that has trained us to evaluate people like options in a catalog. And the film captures that exhaustion with dry, unsentimental accuracy, and it earns real credit for refusing easy comfort. Song is not interested in reassuring anyone. And the craft on display is consistently and constantly timeless. It functions almost as a counter argument to its content, as if the camera is quietly insisting on the possibility of tenderness, even as the story interrogates it. And so, with that said, the one scene I keep returning to is the dinner between Lucy and Harry. Lucy arrives in full professional armor, treating the date like a client consultation, analyzing the variables like a spreadsheet out loud. And Harry, looking hot, may I add, rather than retreating, simply refuses to engage on those terms. He tells her quietly and with conviction that he isn't interested in her material assets, because he has a lot of it, that those are cheap and don't last. What he wants are her intangible assets, the things that only sharpen over time. And Pedro Pascal delivers this with a sincerity that makes it feel earned rather than written. And the flicker across Dakota Johnson's face in response in this particular scene, something between recognition and fear, is the most honest acting she does in the film as a whole. And for a brief stretch of screen time, the full weight of the story becomes legible on the screen. The dialogue in this conversation felt and sounded the most realistic, out of the entire film. And quite frankly, I could watch this dinner scene for an hour or two or more, and I would not be bored. It was like I was overhearing the conversation from the table over, which I'm not supposed to be privy to, but I can't help but eavesdrop to know what happens and what they say next, which is precisely what made what followed so difficult to sit with. Because the film, to my utter disappointment, does not sustain what the scene promises. The characterizations across all three leads remain frustratingly thin. Lucy, for all the camera's attention to her, never fully reveals herself, not in the way that invites interpretation, but in the way that forecloses it. We receive hints of her anxieties, her fear of insufficiency, her ambivalence about her own desires, but they stay as hints. And when the film arrives at its central moment of choice, the choice lands without the weight that it needs because we never truly understood what was at stake for her. John, meanwhile, does not grow over the course of the story. He loves Lucy, or more precisely, he misses her, the idea of her, and the film treats that longing as sufficient. I don't think Song's intention is to romanticize stagnation, but what ends up on screen is a man who hasn't changed, asking for a second chance with a woman who left him because he hadn't changed. And the film asks us to find this moving, romantic even. And naming something realistic is not the same as making it romantic. And the tension between those two things is never resolved. Harry is, for me, the film's most significant failure, not Pedro Pascal's performance per se, because he carries that quiet warmth and intelligence throughout. The story needs Harry to be the wrong answer. It keeps him at a careful distance. He is charming and emotionally present, but he's never fully known. And Lucy holds him at arm's length so consistently that by the time that she concludes that they lack a foundation in their relationship, we're watching a self fulfilling prophecy rather than a genuine reckoning. The result is that the central choice isn't between two fully realized people, it's between someone we know imperfectly, John, and someone the film has, by design, declined to let us know at all, Harry. That is the narrative placing its thumb on the scale, and it sits uneasily alongside another structural problem. A subplot involving Sophie, one of Lucy's clients, played with extraordinary rawness by Zoe Winters, who experiences a sexual assault on a date that Lucy arranged. Winters is the most affecting presence in the film, but the subplot is ultimately pivoted onto Lucy's arc. Sophie's trauma becomes the catalyst for our protagonist's self examination, and a scene meant to demonstrate the irreplaceable intimacy between Lucy and John requires her to confide in her ex boyfriend rather than anyone actually present in her life. It is a narrative convenience that the film asks us to accept as emotional truth, and Sophie is just left on the wayside. Beyond all of this, the plot generates very little forward momentum for a film of nearly 2 hours. Lucy oscillates and the story circles rather than builds. And for a love triangle to function, we need to feel the pull of both options with something close to equal force, the kind of investment that makes a choice genuinely agonizing. These three actors are compelling people to watch, but the romantic heat that the story requires never fully materializes. The scenes between Lucy and John have warmth without urgency, and the scenes between Lucy and Harry have tension of a more cerebral kind. You watch with interest, but rarely with the held breath of someone who doesn't know how this ends. And then there is the ending, which the internet has largely characterized as, quote, broke boy propaganda, a framing that Celine Song herself has called cruel and which is, in fairness, reductive. My objection was never about money, it was about what Lucy's choice reveals and what the film does with that revelation. She leaves Harry on the grounds that they don't know each other well enough and that he deserves better, but the film never once shows her trying to change that. She approaches his emotional openness with suspicion and then concludes the relationship lacks depth, a conclusion the story has engineered rather than earned. What Lucy chooses in the end is not love over wealth, it is familiarity over the vulnerability of being truly known by someone new. That is a recognizable and deeply human thing to do, but the film asks us to receive it as a romantic culmination. And I couldn't quite get there. That distance, more than anything else, is what I've been sitting with, which is why I give The Materialists 3 out of 5 stars. It is not a failure. It is a beautiful film that asks real questions and contains at least one scene, that dinner scene, that I expect to think about for a long time. But it is also a film that declines at almost every structural turn to do justice to its own ambitions. The gap between what it reaches for and what it achieves is not a small one. And I gave it 3 stars because it, in fact, did make me feel something. And if you've seen the movie, I generally love to know where you've landed, especially on the ending. And if you haven't watched it, tell me why not. Leave your comments and your thoughts down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You are awesome. Stay awesome. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.